From International Petroleum Summit, it used to be known, to International Energy Summit, Nigeria's government is hosting the world's to arguably Africa's largest forum for the oil and gas sector. With post-COVID and increased climate change advocacy, fossil fuels and hydrocarbon production started to take a hit, with consequences of reduced funding, call for transition to renewable energy, and other fuels. At this conference, and very early of the four-day meeting, many hydrocarbon resource-rich countries beg to slightly differ on the conversation about the future of oil use. The Group Managing Director and CEO NMPC Limited provoked thoughts around energy transition, justice, and the implication of rising demand that are capable of causing social chaos if it's not met with supply.
Transition must have sanity, and there must be justice in transmission, energy transition. And that justice means that help us to get to a point where we're able to transport our ordinary people from their homes to their workplaces in the short term, and ultimately also assist us in making sure that we have the most friendly fuel that is put in place in the next 5 to 10 years. And ultimately, as we also build our ability to put the renewables on the table, and even that we can't do without financing, and we also know that there's shortage of finance in this respect.
With global demand rising and crude at over $100 to the barrel, last seen since 2014, OPEC Secretary General speaks to the numbers and the implications of a sustained attack on hydrocarbon resource.
The investment requirements clearly underline that any talk of the oil and gas industries being consigned to the past and of the need to halt new investments in oil and gas is misguided.
Nigeria will simply continue to develop its gas resource as a transition fuel, which is considered clean also. And that's the position of President Muhammadu Buhari, who is here represented by the Minister of State.
At the heart of this administration is a vision to drive infrastructure and industrial development of the country in order to prosper her citizens and make life more meaningful to all. Natural gas ticks all the boxes as a vehicle to help government achieve the aspiration.
Rounding the day off the international panel session, Africa's ministers of oil are unanimous on balancing energy security with environmental sustainability through clean energy mix on the back of technology as the transition fuel, clearly announcing Africa's voice on what works amidst global debate. Olu Phillips, Channels Television News.
All right, for analysis now, we have Temitope Kola, the Senior Manager, Oil and Gas Practice at Anderson, joining us in the studio. Good morning, great to have you.
Good morning, Ladi. Nice to be here.
Yeah, so you heard what the minister said there. It's the Nigerian International Energy Summit, started a day before yesterday, and it's Nigeria's official energy industry event, you know, at this point. What were the key takeaways for you from what you've heard so far?
Okay, thanks, Ladi, once again. For me, the Nigerian International Energy Summit is an agenda-setting forum. And it's basically saying to us as Nigerians that this is where we're going with respect to the petroleum industry, which is, before now, we'll call it the Nigeria International Petroleum Summit.
Yes.
Now, because we're having energy transition, we're having conversations around disregarding fossil fuel, or at least reducing investments
same way
in fossil
IOCs
fuel.
are changing to energy.
Exactly,
Yeah, so
exactly. So that's what has happened to the summit, saying, oh, we're going the way of energy transition. And so I think it's a great event, and it's an avenue for the government to galvanize support, especially with respect to harnessing the resources the way we have them as they are today. If you look at what's happening in the West, the conversation is around energy transition largely, and we are at the side of the divide where we still have the resources there. So the question is, what do we want to do with our hydrocarbon? It's important that Nigeria then galvanizes support from all the important stakeholders to ensure that we have the resources exploited before they are useless for us, I would say.
Yeah, and that would be quite an interesting time, I must say. But, you know, this is not the first summit. There have been others. What would you say, you know, came out of other summits?
Okay, I recall that last year, for instance, conversations happened around the passage of the Petroleum Industry Bill, which is now something that we have, the Petroleum Industry Act 2021. So before then, there were conversations about how it was very important for us to pass the bill to encourage investment because that stayed for almost a decade before being passed, right? There's also been conversations in previous years about achieving the sub $10 costs of production per barrel. And we see the NNPC and NAPIMS driving towards that angle already and pushing the operators to get to that. So indeed, if you look at all of the conversations that have been happening in the summit, really and truly, I would say that it's been going towards, let's see how we can get operations optimized within that sector and encourage investment and, of course, move that forward because, again, we can't talk about Nigeria without talking about energy, without talking about petroleum industry. And so it's been interesting to see conversations happening with local content and developing local capacity as well. And that, in a way, has informed some of the changes that we've seen within the sector. So it's a laudable event.
And I listened, and there was also talk about how, you know, technology could make dirty alternatives cleaner. What are the possibilities there?
So this is about digital transformation, and as we all see digital transformation, it's all about data collection and analysis, right? One thing that we've seen is that you spend more when you don't adopt technology. Right. What technology does for you with data gathering, big data analytics is that it gives you information, historical information that helps you decision making, whether in respect to asset optimization, for instance. Right. We have an OML, say 112, right, and it's been producing for a couple of years. You have a device that gets that information and interprets it and tells you how much more you need to do in optimizing the reserves, right? And that's really about it, that you don't continue because you also spend to get a lot from there. And when you spend, you're burning energy as well. So it makes it dirty. So it's just a circle that you need to clean up by exploring the use of technology. And by that, you're gathering data, even for assets, for equipment maintenance and operations, for instance. When you have information, it helps you to take better decisions in terms of, oh, how much reserves do we have here and how much do we need to explore? Is it even worth the investment at all? Should we move to another field and ensure that we explore some more in some other places? And that's what, for me, digital transformation is doing within the oil and gas industry.
And that's where technology comes in there. So the PIA was passed into law, and but how does the agenda of the Nigerian, government, in respect to, energy transition, at the ongoing summit, how does it align with the provisions of the Act?
Interestingly, when you look at the Petroleum Industry Act, it doesn't exactly speak to energy transition, but there are indicators, and it's about what we're also hearing from the summit. So at the summit, like we listened to the introductory speech of the Minister of State for Petroleum, or as well as the GMD of the NNPC, right? The conversation is really about gas as a transition fuel. There are two extremes, really. There are some people who think that you shouldn't even have gas as a go-between at all. You just transit to renewable energy altogether. But as a matter of fact, Nigeria has more gas reserves than oil reserves. So it's only important for us to then see it that way and ensure that we don't disregard, we can't even disregard gas, right? So if we see gas as a transition for, because it's cleaner energy compared to crude oil, for instance. And so
some still see as dirty.
Some still see it as dirty, but it's cleaner, right? We can have LPG, for instance, liquefied petroleum gas to power vehicles. We could have LNG to do a lot of things, and even for domestic, as against using firewood, as against using kerosene, which is an heavier fuel, for instance.
As long as it's not as dirty.
Yeah, as long as it's not as dirty, and it gives us the opportunity to maximize that resource that we have. And that's the kind of conversation that we see the NNPC of GMD pushing for. And that's seems to me like where Nigeria stands at the moment, that let's see how we can explore more of this gas. So that's exactly what you see the Petroleum Industry Act trying to do, to give some sort of incentives to investors with respect to gas. For instance, now if you going into transportation of gas, you could have as many as 10 years tax holiday, right? That's what the PIA has presented us with. There are other incentives to just encourage exploration of gas. So you see that where the PIA seem to stand is that middle ground where we say, okay, we are gradually leaving out crude oil, but we'll go to gas until we're able to explore as much as we need, and then we move to renewable energy completely.
Quite interesting. But, look, talking about gas now, are there any, fantastic incentives, when it comes to, investment in that gas sector?
Well, I would say it depends on who the investor is, right? The moment we see a couple of investment, like I mentioned earlier, there is a 10-year tax holiday for those who would, transport the gas. And the essence of that is that we have gas used in Nigeria. Reason because it's even sometimes more profitable for companies who produce gas to export them outside the country. So how do we ensure that we domesticate that? And that's why you see things like the domestic gas pricing policy, for instance, to ensure that gas is made available in country rather than sell it out, even though you might make more selling it out of the country. So let's give some people that avenue to have the some sort of tax holiday if they're able to transport it from one point to the other. The other thing is that, again, if you have an integrated approach to your operations, whereas you operate, say, crude oil, you're exploring crude oil and gas at the same time, you could have some of your cost in gas commingled into your crude oil operation, which is better in a sense because it gives you some sort of incentives to also say, yeah, I don't have to bear my cost for the gas revenue. Right. The other thing you see with gas exploration is that, as against crude oil, you don't have hydrocarbon tax paid. It's just the company's income tax. Right. So some of those incentives we would say, yes, they are incentives, but again, it's down to the investors to sit back and indeed criticize those incentives and say, is it worth the chase? Because of the level of investment required. Even though gas has been identified as a transition fuel, what's also been realized as an estimate across the world is that there is a need for about $120 trillion investment in the transition technologies, right? So there's a lot of investment required. So do we have enough incentives to encourage that investment into Nigeria? I think that would be the real question at the table. And of course, I guess the stakeholders will sit back and look at how they would encourage that investment, which is part of the agenda of this ongoing event.
All right, looking at, the case of Nigeria now, what would you say is the optimum energy mix, for this country?
Wow. Optimum energy mix. Again, it goes back to where are we in Nigeria? At the moment, we don't want to, and if you look at the world in general, we contribute only about 2 to 4% of the carbon emission that we're talking about in Africa. So that's where the GMD of NNPC comes in, for instance, and says that if you're talking about transition, let it be a just transition, right? It's fair to say that in the other part of the world that have been industrialized fully, for instance, there is so much of carbon emission, and there is the need to deal with carbon emission, right? And when the president also went to the Glasgow event last year, it was clear by saying that we're looking at 2060 for transition, right? So it's safe to say that if you're looking at the balance, we're staying a lot with the gas as transition fuel, while we're integrating some renewable energy at the moment and ensure that with time, we are able to then move completely. But of course, the set time is 2060, and we are not ready to get to that point yet. Again, because we don't want to lose the resources that we so much believe in at this point in time.
Right. And obviously, oil prices are surging at the moment. And, the narrative now is, Nigeria is not benefiting, from these prices. But How can we change this narrative, in the shortest possible time?
In the shortest possible time, hopefully the
While the
Dangote
prices
refineries,
remain high.
yeah, I hope Dangote refineries will come to our aid so soon, right? And the reason is because, yes, we export crude, but we don't produce the refined product. So we have to buy at huge cost. And that means a lot of subsidy by the Nigerian government, especially with the plan to continue to subsidize in the near term. So the only solution I see at the moment is for us to develop local capacity to refine, right? We produce and then we can, then refine. If we refine, then it makes it a lot better for us. We deal with the landing cost. We don't have to factor in landing cost to the cost of production or the cost of supplying the fuel, right? So it means a lot if we really take into consideration our concerns about rehabilitating the refineries that are not working at the moment and ensure that they indeed work. The question again is, how soon are we going to have that happen? Maybe Dangote would be our savior. I wouldn't know, but I think maybe you could give us some sort of breather.
Some respite.
Yeah.
Because it's incredible that, in 2022, we're still talking about refining.
Yeah.
At this point, it's quite incredible. Shouldn't be happening. But, going forward now, what's your, outlook for Nigeria's oil and gas sector?
Well, it's tough to say that even with the Ukraine-Russia tension at the moment. But I see us going forward looking at the PIA with us, and then with a new authority, as well as the commission, that's the Nigerian Upstream Regulatory Petroleum Commission. I see us doing some strategic moves, making some strategic moves as to how exactly do we want to approach this industry? How do we want to encourage, for instance, the upstream sector? The Upstream Commission needs to take a look at what are the things that they need to present to investors, right? The IOCs are divesting, for instance. How do we encourage them to invest in the gas that we're touting as a transition fuel? How do
the
we...
group MD said it's because of their commitment to,
Yeah, to zero emission, zero carbon emission.
They are divesting.
Yeah, well, but there is something, then you need to encourage them to get into gas. For instance, when CEPLAT last year had the conversation around its own summit, right, the idea was for CEPLAT, for instance, which is an indigenous firm, to concentrate on gas as well, right? So how do we encourage the other IOCs, for instance, to do same, to ensure, because capital is very important for us to explore whatever resources that we have. If we don't have the right resources to explore them, then they are as useless as any other thing. Right. So I see the Upstream Commission getting into that place and saying that we want to encourage more people to come and participate, and what are the incentives, what are the things that we need to bring to the table to encourage. And again, we know that insecurity is a problem. For instance, when you hear the Walter Smith chair talking about the challenges, there is so much of crude theft. And so Nigeria needs to rise up to those challenges and help really encourage the activities of investors within the industry.
And make it more attractive. To bring in some investment. All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Temitope Kolade, Senior Manager, Oil, Gas and Power at Anderson. It was great having you on the program today.
Thank you, Ladi.